Hi again the guys, and welcome to episode 45 of SuperSports, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection of exotic cars, which nestle between supercar and regular sports car. And in this particular pick we are featuring another variation of the Jaguar XK. We've already of course featured the XKRS model earlier on in this series, but now we are featuring the slightly more mainstream, not necessarily quite as hardcore, and I would say a little bit more classy, a little bit more elegant XKR. The pretty much flagship of Jaguar's performance exotics, and a great rival to stuff like the Aston Martin DB9, the Vantage, the Maserati Gran Turismo, and various other vehicles of that kind of luxury GT nature. So the question is, with the option of multiple Jaguar XKs on the game, the XK, the XK8, the XKR, the XKRS, even the R performance model, is this car really worth getting instead of, or potentially as well as, the other models? Well, consider what you get. You get a 5-litre supercharged engine, it's rear-wheel drive as you'd probably expect, and it produces a very healthy amount of power. As you'd expect, it actually sits between the XK and the XKRS. It's not quite as powerful as the XKRS, but it is more powerful than the XK Luxury Coupe. It produces 808 horsepower, which is a pretty impressive amount of power, 707 foot-pounds of torque, which combined with that power means that in a straight line at least, this car should pack a pretty mighty punch. As far as weight, it's a pretty heavy car to begin with, around 1.8 tonnes or so. When you strip it out, it's actually a lot lighter than you'd expect. Now, it's no super light, it's not going to worry something like a Caterham in that regard, of course, but it weighs 1,342 kilos, which is actually not bad at all for a pretty big and luxurious and very well-built GT car. Now, as far as horsepower per tonne, even though it does weigh more than some others, the huge power means that it still puts out 602. So that's a pretty good amount of horsepower per tonne to be working with. And as far as the PP, I would actually say this car is pretty much perfectly placed. It sits at 599 PP, which incidentally is the exact same PP as a fully tuned Plymouth Cuda 446 pack, which incidentally has a similar kind of spec, similar kind of power, and similar kind of straight line performance. So for 155 grand, which is what this car costs, is it worth checking out? What do you actually get from that admittedly impressive spec? Well, in a straight line, it is a strong car. The straight line performance is, I would say, among the best of the British performance cars on the game. Many of them are not as quick as they deserve to be. We've mentioned them before on the channel, the McLaren F1, the Speed 12, the XJ220, and various others. They're just not as quick as they should be in comparison to the other exotics. With the GT cars though, they're actually not too bad. This car sits at around the high 250s to 260 mph region under its own power, which is pretty much what you'd expect from a high performance Jag. Many of them on the game have that kind of performance. The XFR, the XKRS, they all kind of hover around that kind of region. But for this car, I would say that's actually a really good top speed. That means that it is quicker than most of the other Aston Martins, it's quicker than the Maserati Gran Turismo by a significant margin, and it can outrun most, in fact, of the other cars in this series. There are some, of course, which it can't outrun, but it can outrun the F430, the Gallardo, the Gran Turismo, pretty much all of the other British GT coupes, so it is a strong straight line machine. Now, as far as comparing it to the XKRS, it may lose out to that car overall in a straight line, but you'd probably expect it to. Personally though, I actually prefer this car to the XKRS. The XKRS, although I understand why people would like it, just never really did it for me. To me, the whole point of the Jag is to have a big, classy, elegant coupe, whereas the XKRS is trying to turn it into some kind of Scuderia or Superleggera equivalent, and that's just not going to work with the Jag. It's just not built for that. Now, to some degree, Jaguar obviously made it work. People like that. It just doesn't do it for me. It's not the kind of car which I would ever choose for that kind of driving. It's just not built for it. It's like choosing a truck for track racing. It can be done, but there are just better options. So if you do plan to use this as a track car, I would say it's actually at least as good as the XKRS, because the XKRS is, dare I say it, a little bit overrated as far as I'm concerned. You don't see a huge amount of people using any of the XKRs, but when people do, they tend to be the S version. Whereas this version is, to all intents and purposes, as good as that car. But it's cheaper, it does it with less power, it has a lower PP, which makes it more accessible in a wider variety of races, and apart from personal opinion, which is a big factor admittedly with me personally with this car compared to the S version, it's factually not necessarily as good on paper, but close enough to be a justified alternative, and especially in terms of what it's actually capable of around the track, it's a very viable alternative to the S version. And not just the S version, but as we said before, many of the other cars in this series. In terms of handling, it's very good. In fact, it's far better than a car of its size and weight should actually really be. The handling is very smooth, very controlled. It makes a fantastic drift car if you want it to be, but at the same time, for a car with so much power and torque, and it really does have a lot, it's surprisingly forgiving and really beginner friendly as well. So it's not an obvious choice of super sports car, but I would say that if you're looking for a strong all-rounder within this category, the XKR is actually a really solid choice to go for, and it's also a choice which you're pretty much guaranteed to be the only person in the lobby to be using it. But that's it overall for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.